And just looking at the bar loading. All right. Okay, I guess we are live now from Christchurch Cathedral. Hi, everybody, and welcome those of us who are joining us online, watching on the live, maybe watching after the fact. My name is Magda Orlandez. I'm with the Cincinnati Interfaith Worker Center. And I've been with the team since about 2017, full-time as a full-time staff member. The Worker Center was started in 2005 as a day labor organizing project and is a part of a long tradition of worker organizations that started primarily in the South with Black workers, Black African-American workers and immigrant workers, workers of color, coming together in the community who were excluded or disprotected from labor, from the traditional collective bargaining agreements or other labor rights protections, such as domestic workers or farm workers that were excluded from minimum wage and union rights protections, right? And it has grown ever since then, ever since the 80s. And here in Cincinnati, we've been around for almost 20 years, doing this kind of work down in the vineyard, making a way out of no way with workers in fish industries, workers who are vulnerabilized because of their immigration status, because of their race or gender, because of the industry that they're in. And it started out as a day labor organizing project, primarily working with temp workers, working for, primarily African-American temp workers down and over the Rhine, working through these temp agencies and getting cheated out of the minimum wage, right? From there, let me see. So my first entry, my first foray into the world of Worker Center, and before I interned here in 2016, I didn't even know what a Worker Center was. I come from, I'm an immigrant myself. I come from Western Europe, from Luxembourg. My mom's Polish. She's worked in a lot of different blue collar jobs throughout her life in hospitality, as a domestic worker, as a nurse's aide. So these issues are always important to my heart. When I learned about the Worker Center and I had an opportunity to intern there, it was really special for me. I remember my second week on the job, just getting thrown into the mix. There was a group of workers who had been working for a rebar company called R&R Steel. Some of you may have heard about this case. They were working to help build this high rise on 8th and Sycamore, doing the rebar. They were immigrant workers as part of a mostly immigrant workforce there, working for R&R Steel. And they were supposed to be making some $46 an hour on this job that was prevailing wage because it was government supported. They weren't given water or rest breaks. There were issues about their OSHA certifications being falsified, and they were taken home somewhere around $18 an hour, with the employer pocketing the rest and dumping money into 401k accounts that he then turned around and liquidated himself without telling any of the workers about it. Now, I come into this process and these guys, they have just started on this journey that ended up being a 60-year-long journey through wage and hour investigations, OSHA investigations. There were even criminal charges brought, and for the first time ever, this local contractor, for the first time ever in our district, this local contractor was actually sentenced to prison on the fraud, on the 401k, on the pension embezzlement, and on the falsification of records. But there were also major findings of wage theft against this contractor to the tune of some $300,000 for some 60 odd workers, right? So I come in, it's my second week on the job, and I learn about this case, and the guys, they're working together with the community. They're going out on delegations to inform the community, especially folks who have hired this company, about the business practices and about how they were using a lot of times public dollars to cheat their workers. And I learned that they have been working on none other than the new gym facility that was being built at my university. I graduated from Miami University, proud Red Hawk. And so when we learned this, we also knew that, well, there's an upcoming board meeting, and these folks, they want to get their story out. These workers, they've been going on the record. They're supporting this investigation, and it's important for the community to be aware that, we can't let bad actors out here run around and cheat workers and get away with it. These were our tuition dollars going to fund this employer. And so we supported the workers in bringing a delegation to the school's board of directors in terms of making them aware of this and making them aware that this company should not be working at the university. They should not be working there. I mean, there were safety issues associated as well with some of the work practices and the quality of the work. And to this day, I mean, this contractor has been disbarred because of all of these violations, has been disbarred from working within Cincinnati, you know. So that was kind of my entry point into some of this work. These brave workers came forward and they were undocumented. And as a result of the cooperation with this investigation and bringing all of this to light, they were able to get a trafficking visa for victims of human trafficking, because those are the kinds of realities that a lot of immigrants, like stuck between a rock and a hard place and needing to work, because we all have to work to live, are confronted with on the job. And this is part of the reality that our worker center like lives within every single day as we support working people from all, you know, of all colors and origins to deal with and struggle through the issues that they're facing on the job, right? Immigration is a bit thorny and it's complicated. I mean, this country hasn't seen a major immigration overhaul since about the 80s, which is when this idea that in order to work in this country, if you are not born here, you have to have work authorization, and that is tied to your immigration status. And it seems simple enough, but I think it's important to kind of draw out that it's actually not always quite so simple. So, you know, a lot of folks might have heard about all this recent influx into our own area in Cincinnati. Folks coming up from Venezuela, for example, people coming in on humanitarian parole who are refugees. But a lot of times what people don't realize is that there are many different types of status and many different types of immigration status you can have, and many different places in the process that you can be in. So just because you come in, for example, with an advanced humanitarian parole doesn't mean that you're automatically going to have a work authorization. And just to give an example of what that actually can look like, I remember in about 2021, we got a call because we run a workers' rights clinic and a workers' rights hotline. We primarily do a lot of education, but also assist workers in coming forward and blowing the whistle on these kinds of violations when they confront them on the job. So we had a situation, somebody came to us looking for support. They had been working at a local ice cream franchise. That was, you know, the company was based out of Georgia, but they had one local shop, and she hadn't gotten paid for about 8 or 9 weeks. Right? I mean, can you imagine that? It does, you know, rent's going to be due. She's got a family to support, and she hasn't gotten paid for about 2 months and a half. She had come into this country actually on, I think it was on a humanitarian parole. I mean, she had, you know, she was all up and good in terms of her status of being here. She had actually gotten authorization, her work authorization approved, but there was such a backlog at the time within the immigration administrative process that she was still at that point in time in an 8-month wait to get the actual card that she would have to take to Social Security to get a number. Now we were able to work out a settlement with the company and with her, where they were going to pay her back wages, but the company kept insisting, well, but we can't pay if we don't have a social, which we all get. I mean, you got to do the, you know, you have to pay your taxes, you have to do your withholdings, and that's all fine and good. But by the time that eventually she was able to get that card and get all that paperwork sorted out, the company closed shop here. They pieced out back to Georgia and just never returned any of the calls or any of the messages, right? I mean, it's hard. It's hard out here for working people. And there are many ways in which the system does make it just so complicated to navigate, even when you are, you know, in all the best of the circumstances, when you're here and you're doing all the right things, it's still hard. I mean, it's hard for American workers. One of our big flagship cases when the Worker Center started out, and this is well before my time, was a group of temp workers who were working at a recycling facility at Rumpke through a temp agency. Because this temp agency had a city contract, they were supposed to be paying these workers a living wage. But not only were they paying them at the federal minimum wage in 09, I think it was, they were also making deductions from their paychecks for things like transportation and PPE, which was putting them below minimum wage, right? I mean, these are situations that, wage theft doesn't discriminate, like safety and health issues don't discriminate, but workers who find themselves at different intersections of vulnerability often are the most vulnerable. Low-wage workers in these types of efficient industries like temp work, like gig work, like independent contracting, like the construction industry, like janitorial work, the franchises, there's just these compounding factors that not only make you more vulnerable to experiencing this type of labor violation, but that also make it harder to come forward and to vindicate your rights. At the end of the day, as a worker center, we have to realize that we can help people. We can all try to be more helpful in our lives to other people. But when it comes to what happens on the job, workers really are the agent of change. They are the agent that is at the front line of compliance. They see what's going on and they're in the position to do something about it directly. And without a worker coming forward, there is just no way, not for us as the worker center, not for the federal government, to be able to intervene and make sure that people's rights are respected. So workers really are the key person, the key agent when it comes to any of the work that we do. I want to tell you a little bit about the kind of impact case, the kind of situation where that as a worker center, we see a lot of different cases. There's individual complaints. Every case is important. Every worker is important. These are people's paychecks. These are their livelihoods. These are their bodies that get hurt on the job. In some cases, they don't just involve individual workers. And when it comes to really making an impact in an industry, it really does take a whole community to stand up a case, right? To stand up for justice, like with the R&R Steel case that I was mentioning before. There were about eight different agencies involved from the government side, the worker center, a lot of community support, all wrapping around the workers themselves to make sure that they were supported, to be able to stay through the process and to really bring it home. I want to tell you an example about another case that we had at the worker center with a local contractor that just recently settled in 2023. They're called Gem Interiors. They're Milford-based contractors doing drywall and framing. Now, not to backtrack too far, but all the way back in 2011 between 2011 and 2013, there was already a major investigation from the Department of Labor that found that this company, which was, almost exclusively recruiting from the immigrant community again, was found liable for $250,000 in back wages and damages on the wage theft case for about 90 workers. And also were committing such egregious violations of abusing the seasonal worker program where they were bringing in workers on agricultural visas to work in the construction industry. And there were definitely elements of trafficking involved in terms of, the housing that they were providing people, the housing that they were putting people in. And the violations were so egregious that they were actually prohibited from participating in this visa program for 2 years after this initial finding, right? It's not a small contractor. They have a pretty big market share. I mean, they at the time, or at one point in time, they were the preferred developer for Kroger's, right? But that case wasn't enough. Sure enough, they were back at it. And so in about 2015, there was another complaint from a supervisor who actually had been through that initial investigation process and figured, well, I remember getting those back wages, but we're still not getting paid overtime. What's up with that? And so they reached out to the Department of Labor. Now, the Worker Center had not been involved in the course of the first investigation, so I don't have too many details about that. But by the time that this 2015 investigation rolls around, our local Worker Center, in partnership with local labor unions, with the faith community, and really with a growing immigrant base at the time, being one of the few agencies that actually had bilingual staff, was actually embedded in a way that that could serve people in their own language, that created a relationship of trust within that immigrant community. And so, in the course of this complaint, well, there were a lot of people who were affected within our community. What the contractor had started doing was telling people, like hiring them and paying them as though they were contractors, when really they were just all working for the same company. I mean, they are they were a major company doing, working as the preferred developer for Kroger's, but they only have like 25 people on payroll. And they're churning out all this work. Now, how is this possible? Are these people really contractors, or are they actually employees? Like, what's going on here? And within that collaboration, within that investigation process, the Federal Department of Labor, the wage and hour investigator, was able to get in touch with local workers through this collaboration between the Worker Center and the labor unions, like active within that part of the industry. And very quickly, as part of it was having to have a certain like level of openness and creativity in the investigation process. How is the company having like 25 people on payroll and churning out all this work? Well, it's easy to put a lot of things on paper, but what people's lived experiences really are don't always match up with what the company says that it does, right? And so in that investigation process, through the collaboration and hearing directly from the workers, well, this is what the work looks like on the day-to-day at this job site. Here's these tool cards that have our names on them that we have to use. Being able to actually speak directly to these immigrant workers who were fearful, who did not want to go down to the federal building, right? Who were not sure about coming forward. But through this community collaboration where the Worker Center became a safe space, was a space where people, that could be like whole human beings, could find people who spoke their own language, that created the kind of relationship and environment of trust that allowed for the investigators to really delve into the issues and the real facts of what was going on. And in the course of that investigation, found that the company was actually owed some over 200 workers overtime that were being misclassified as subcontractors, right? Now this case, it was a big and complicated case. I mean, the investigator shared with us the size of the case file. I mean, it's probably, towering like above a table, taller than me if you put it on the table. None of that would have been possible without the workers' cooperation into this investigation. None of this would have been uncovered without workers being brave and coming forward and having a space and having access to the process of being part of this investigation and cooperating and collaborating within this process. And through the course of the next 6 years, this case actually went through litigation, which is, again, it's a complicated process. I mean, a lot of the work that we do at the Worker Center is about access to the systems of justice. We know the worker is the primary agent of change, right? But a lot of these systems, the bureaucracies of it, the language barriers, the complicatedness of it, the sheer time that it takes, can make these processes really opaque, really difficult to sort of understand and to navigate and stay the course. Because at the end of the day, rent doesn't wait, right? You got to put food on the table. Maybe there's a job out of state, right? Circumstances change. So how do you stay involved in this process and in this work? How do you actually get access to vindicating your rights? And through the process then of this collaboration, like our Worker Center, we're not just, we're not the government. We're not just here to do investigations or like file complaints. We are a community space. We do community organizing around these issues. We do education, and a lot of these workers, the way that they stayed involved with the Worker Center through the course of this whole like investigation, even when things were moving slow and there wasn't any news, was through our safety and health training program. Now, a lot of immigrants, I don't know if you know this, but Latino immigrants in construction are at the highest risk for injury and fatalities in our region. And a lot of it stems from a lack of access to safety and health information and education and training in their own language. And then coupled with the ways in which people, again, become vulnerable to employers taking advantage of the lack of information about their rights and about things like safety and health to, cut corners on safety and create conditions that are unsafe to work within. And construction is just a very, very hazardous industry. Now these workers, they became very engaged in the OSHA 10 safety and health certification program, the training program that is led by my coworker Manuel Perez, who's probably the only Spanish-speaking OSHA trainer in several hours of a radius in our region, right? And they became some of the main activists in terms of like bringing people into this and making sure that other workers in their community, other workers in construction, other Latino workers are able to get access to this vital and sometimes life-saving, definitely limb-saving information and training and education. So 6 years later, when this case finally settled, in this case, they found, they ordered the company to pay back $256,000 to over 180 workers. Within 30 days, we had 30 people in our office of this same crew that, for the most part, you'd think that they'd be in the wind, right? Like I said, rent doesn't wait. There's, work opportunities arise out of state. Some of these workers have returned to Mexico since then. But nevertheless, like there's a core group of these workers that said, you know what, we're gonna show up. Like we're gonna see this through to the end, and we're gonna show up not just to claim our own back wages, but to help and make sure that everybody on this list, all of the people that we know about this case and that they can get their back wages too. Because throughout, it was very, very much a transformational process, right? Throughout this whole life of this case, learning about how not only is it important to vindicate your rights and cooperate in the process, but what does it really mean to stand up, not just for yourself, but for the community, and really valuing that, right? And to this, a year later, they're still meeting, it's about a year later now, and they're still meeting every month to try to figure out, well, who haven't we reached yet, and how can we identify those? And we've had people from South Carolina, I think somebody called in. We had folks from Georgia call in. We had one person reach out all the way from Mexico through this community connection and through the contact with these workers who are often, transient or migrant workers, migratory immigrants in these like precarious situations. But again, this connection that they have to each other and the importance that they put into this work has allowed for us to reach so many more people that otherwise would have been in the wind. And on top of it, because of the ability to actually build a strong case here through the cooperation of all these workers that were willing to go on the record, were willing to testify if it came to it, the government was able to, in the settlement, negotiate for an enhanced, what they call an enhanced monitoring agreement, which means that because this company is already like on the hook for the second time for the same issue, they have agreed to being a monitoring program for the next 3 years, and that they're basically not going to do it again. They're not going to go and hire any independent subcontractors that are not compliant with all of the regulations and the necessary disclosures over the next 3 years, submitting disclosures to the Federal Department of Labor every 3 months. And again, it's easy to say things on paper, but because there are so many workers that were involved in this process, it gives an opportunity to be part of this monitoring, making sure that this company is respecting their workers' rights, right? This is hard. This is hard work. And it really takes a whole community to stand up this kind of a process, right? Through cases like this Gem Interiors, the Gem Interiors Enforcement and Collaboration, the R&R Steel case, even going all the way back to the Rumpke days, which was a case that involved Federal Department of Labor in terms of these minimum wage violations, as well as the city of Cincinnati on the living wage ordinance. The Worker Center has built a practice of this like interagency cooperation and community collaboration, bringing together faith institutions and organizations in the union movement, civil rights organizations, to really stand up a community that can carry and support those workers who are the most vulnerable. And in that process, or with the goal of just improving that and scaling that and always finding ways to do more with what we have and to collaborate better. Since 2022, we have been a regional partner to the Federal Department of Labor, specifically in support of vulnerable workers immigrant workers coming forward on these types of labor violations, and the strategic enforcement in these industries that are often high violation. I mean, things happen all the time. It's kind of like an open secret. Everybody knows it, but who's coming forward? So these are high violation industries, but they are very low reporting, which is why it's so hard to make sure that, you know, there's not a culture of wage theft, and there's a culture of safety, there's a culture of respect for people's rights in these industries. And bringing together an interagency roundtable that the city has been participating in as well, local, state, and federal governments, all coming together with worker centers across the state of Ohio and in the Midwest to figure out how can we all best support the immigrant workers in our community, the vulnerable workers in our community, the low-wage workers in our community in these industries that are so rife with labor rights violations and abuses of workers. I want to just give a shout out real quick. I see Laura Castillo is here from the City of Cincinnati, the Department of Economic Inclusion. You know, the Worker Center a few years ago in 2016, based on what we've learned, what the community learned, and what the workers were seeing on in the construction industry, and many of them immigrant workers in the construction industry, with how there's such a lack of transparency in who is even on a job site, who is a subcontractor here, who is being hired by who's actually responsible. There was the city passed a wage theft ordinance, and one of its main and key ingredients is this transparency requirement that anywhere where there is like city support, anywhere where tax dollars are going into supporting developments, we have to have clarity on who all is on this job site. There are these things like these kinds of policy mechanisms, the collaboration between a city and the different levels of administration and with the workers on the ground are really what will make things like this monitoring, right, where Gem Interiors agrees to stick to this agreement, to respect people's rights, to not be, you know, skirting around regulations by hiding who's actually on their job. These are the types of things that will help us be able to do that. And I know that right now, through this interagency vulnerable workers roundtable, working together with these different agencies and different community organizations and the workers on the ground, we're working on how to use these tools that are in our toolkit, how to be coordinated and collaborative in terms of really focusing on this industry, right? And seeing how we can scale this work and making sure that a culture of respect and dignity on the job is a reality for working people in Cincinnati. So yeah, I mean, this is why things like the city ordinance matters, right? And the ways in which that working people so often are confronted on the job with these types of issues, you know, feeling isolated because maybe I don't have work authorization. Maybe I have a record. Maybe I don't speak the language. Maybe my supervisor is harassing us. All of these things that put workers in a situation of isolation. And within the immigrant community, I mean, there's definitely all of these compounding and intersecting issues that further isolate a worker who in many situations or in some ways is unable to even to come out of the shadows, or feels like they're unable to come out of the shadows because they don't even know whether they can work under their own name, right? All of these are the reasons why the community needs a safe space to come and be themselves, to have this kind of this approach that really sees them as a whole person, as a whole part of our community, as a family, that can support them in terms of knowing about their rights, but also finding the resources and the support and the understanding and the accompaniment to say, you're not alone. Like we will walk through this with you all the way. And that is something that throughout the life of and the existence of the Worker Center, no matter who is in the administration, no matter what is going on politically, workers still have to work, and the economy still needs workers. And bad actors, I mean, in any free society, there are going to be bad actors taking advantage of people. And so it is just so crucial for the community to be able to have a space that they can be a part of, and where they can feel empowered to come forward, vindicate their rights, and to come together with the rest of the community as their support, as a whole movement, as a whole community. And that's the kind of place that the Worker Center is to so many people. And it's thanks in part to organizations and groups like this one, that the community of workers, of low-wage workers, of immigrant workers that are often, in the way that they're talked about in the media, or the way that, just like the perception that the community might have, feel isolated. Groups like, organizations like this one, groups like this one, that support the Worker Center, that support these folks, are so crucial to making that possible, right? For people to take the courage and take the leap. It's a leap of faith, really.
Thank you, Magda. So, one thing that comes to my head was kind of marvelous job of showing us how widely the needs and how isolated workers women. This what are you seeing? Seeing new issues or new problems?
I'm sorry, I just needed a little sip, going on for 20 minutes at a time, I was getting parched there. No, I would say, so I've been at the Worker Center now since 2017. I know Brennan can probably speak to this even better because, he's been there longer. I think so many of these issues are really perennial, right? Wage theft, when you do this for such a long time, it kind of seems like, okay, is this still what we're talking about? Is this still what we're talking about, right? That people aren't getting a minimum wage? I mean, it's not even like the minimum wage is that high. People are not getting overtime. You'd think that, the FLSA, the Federal Labor Standards Act, which codifies these minimum wage protections, was passed in 1938. You'd think that it would be old by now, but no, it's very much like a perennial issue. I would say that within more recent years, a lot of it has to do with the way that the economy is shifting. I mean, during the pandemic, of course, safety and health really came to the forefront in so many ways that it hadn't been before. I mean, before the pandemic, you'd have to explain to people what PPE was. Now it's just in the vernacular. And unfortunately, whenever these kinds of issues, like however specifically they show up, they still compound at those intersections where low-wage workers and immigrant workers are concentrated in these industries, where people are getting temped out through temp agencies, where people are in like dangerous work. So food processing, for example, I mean, it's pretty clear at this point, the data bear it out, that the workplace was the primary site, like by and large, the primary site of transmission for COVID. And those workplaces where people have to work in close quarters, meat packing, warehouse work, were some of the highest sites of transmissions and death. And they were also considered essential because we can't stop production. It's also where a lot of immigrant workers and the low-wage workers tend to concentrate. I mean, maybe if you look at like all those investigations that were turning up child labor on the night shift in meatpacking facilities, I mean, those are the industries that were hardest hit as well, and where workers in some ways had the least amount of protections in terms of being able to get sick leave, where those are low-paid industries. Another like set of issues that I think have been on the rise, at least anecdotally, based on what we're seeing here, like in the Cincinnati area, is with the cost of living and the increases in rent and the housing crisis. Folks ending up in these employer-provided housing schemes. We had a situation a while back that it was really difficult. There was a worker who, as part of this, this wave of people coming in, as refugees on the way through, across the border, came in on a parole, and was recruited by a temp agency to come to Cincinnati to work in the hospitality industry, at some pretty big hotels. And they told her, we'll put you up with housing. It's all going to be fine. So she ends up here. She doesn't have any family in the area. She's here because of this job. And she's taking home maybe $300 a week because they're making deductions from her pay about the housing. And sometimes, they're paying folks through debit cards because she hasn't even been there long enough to set up a bank account. And sometimes you go to cash out the debit card, and it seems like every payroll, somebody else would have had their debit balance cleared out before they could cash it. And there was an incident about work. I think they were just not happy with her quota because she was older than some of the other workers who were there. And she got fired. And because her housing was tied up with this job, she was about to get evicted or get, turned away. None of this is happening through the courts, of course. And it's the kind of case that thankfully we don't see too often, but we know it happens. And so it's the type of situation where, we kind of got to spring into action. So we did get a government agency involved. They had an investigator assigned within the week, but the problem was because of the precarity of the situation and the fact that there was just so little money available to her, by the time that the investigator reached out, the phone number was disconnected. So these type, the housing situation, those types of precarities, they only ever compound. I think that's kind of where I think in recent years we've been seeing a lot. But in other ways, the work authorization issue has been an issue since 1986, and employers have been taking advantage of it for just as long as that's been around. So to some extent, these issues tend to be are perennial in a way, right? It's a bit of both, I would say.
How do you get the word our steel probably narrative in a news article in Manfar settled? And obviously there are bad actors that don't understand, or else the construction fall out 4 years old after taking through this. So a way to somehow get notices to a construction industry consortium, or a restaurant, or a hospitality group, or the Chamber of Commerce, or someplace where you could have kind of a rolling telephone, or a column in the corner about
forums like this are a good start. And since it'll be recorded for posterity, it'll be available. But those are all great ideas. It's definitely, it's always a challenge. I think the way we primarily get are known in the community is a lot of word of mouth, a lot of people telling each other about it, and just being connected to different service agencies and these different channels. Big stories like R&R definitely made a lot of headlines, maybe not in the Inquirer as much, but definitely in the Latino the Latino news media. They did some great coverage with La Mega Nota over there. But it is definitely, that's kind of that is a key question, and I definitely appreciate all the ideas you were throwing out. I think Brennan has a comment.
But we did have years ago, there was we had a nice grant from the Cincinnati Foundation, and they asked us to collaborate with one of their what they call kind of their backbone groups. It was a group that was run out of United Way called Partners for Competitive Workforce. They provided workforce development training. They coordinated worker training. And so we said, okay, well, we think we can help them because we look at the website and they provide a list of the employers that are benefiting from this philanthropic program. And we see that they are companies that we have help workers expose wage companies. So we thought, okay, well, it's a hard truth. We'll put it out there. We'll see what happens. Would you be surprised to learn that they took the list of employers down on the website after we gave the letter? So it's hard, to get companies to do the right thing. The industry isn't designed for the right thing. But the industry also needs a lot of help. So the amount of government support and philanthropic support that these wage set industries get from worker training programs, apprenticeship programs, we think that that does present an opening, because the Department of Labor actually spends about 10 times more on workforce training than they do on labor standards enforcement. And we're exploring ways that those training dollars might be able to, should be used to benefit workers in the industry and not just the companies that need training. So I think you're really onto something, but I think it will take, it take something coming to leadership from the top down, but also, an awareness that, workers have to file complaints, if it's on the record, so that change, the need for change, but out clearly.
I do also think that I mean we're at a moment of historic approval, union approval, right, and interest in the labor movement right now, and that's important. I will say that I do sometimes perceive like sort of a lack of awareness about the issues because I don't know if it's a generational thing, but like so many people have not grown up in a union household these days. I mean, union density is what, at like 7% or something like that in the private sector. And there are just not a lot of places where people learn about these kinds of issues. So making it important, right? Making it important is something that we all have to do. It's not just about, the headlines of what did who say at which rally, right? But what is actually going on in the community and how do we prioritize what we get outraged about or what we give our time and attention to? I think is just as much of a part of this picture, because who actually ends up benefiting from being distracted by the different sort of like political wind changes or the drama on the red carpet? Like, who benefits from being distracted by those kinds of moments is the people who are getting away with, who don't want a light to be shown on what is happening to working people in their everyday lives, despite the fact that most people in this country are regular working people who are the people who are facing these issues on the job. So how do we make it more of a part of our culture to talk about issues in the workplace and the way workers are confronted by them every day, without just like falling into this apathy of, well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway because my supervisor, my boss, like whoever like on the job holds all the cards here. And even if I did say something, I would just lose my job. Right. And I think it's part of creating a culture of this and really talking about it more, putting it into the zeitgeist is part of building up that courage so that when people say something, something happens. Because the reality is that the vast majority of people who do try to say something do end up suffering an adverse consequence. People don't not speak up because they don't know that something isn't right about what's going on. They might not know exactly what their rights are or exactly what the violation is, but oftentimes people do understand and know that something isn't right. But I think sometimes there's like a lack of a perception and a lack of like real like impact that contributes to a level of like, well, why even bother talking about it if it's not going to change? It's up to us to make that change as a whole community, right?
Your presence is obviously very unique and very good. Are you getting problems? How are you there? Right.
Oh, okay, just the dirty laundry portion of we're doing okay. We're a small organization, and so we've always been able to rely on the big community outreach committee here at Christ Church, the anti-poverty program of Catholic Church. They've always been very central to what we do, and of course, I think to our founding as a church group. And then I think over the years, the workers really have a perspective of, you got to show me that this is something worth my time, and we have done that. And so that's not just workers on the health, it's also the workers who are organized, and they say, oh, we need organized workers who have left their job. We also need an institution for those who don't have representation, because you know, an injury to one is an injury to all. And that is something that is it's not just a mantra of the, it's really, it's, it's core to how some trade unions see their role. So for that reason, we've been able to have like more financial support as well. And then in recent years, we've had more than emphasis on worker safety and health, and that's been very important to us. So there's workplace safety training dollars that are available. So we figure out how to put these different elements together. Yeah, we also have it. It also comes from strange places. I don't know if you want to tell them about the case. We got a mysterious donation in the mail 2 years ago. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not something that's too common, at least in our sphere. But you know, there's a couple of different routes that a complaint can go. You know, we work very closely with government agencies in terms of these complaint processes, but there's also some kinds of actions that are available through the private bar, and access to that is just as important, I think, in many ways, because you know everybody can't be everywhere. Just as a quick parenthesis, you know, there's about 1,800 wage and hour investigators around the country. It's the size of the San Diego Police Department that is charged with making sure that every work site covered under these laws and every worker covered under wage and hour protections actually is getting paid what they're supposed to be getting paid under the law. So this private right of action becomes really important. There was a case, a Cleveland-based company, I think they're in sort of electrical engineering for manufacturing plants, I believe, something along those lines. They had been getting workers in through a visa program, a worker visa program, a relationship with Mexico. I think those were like specific visas for Mexican workers to come in for specific types of jobs. And there was a whistleblower who ended up coming forward and finding, I don't know exactly how, finding his way to a Minnesota-based law firm that does specializes in these kinds of wage and hour and labor and employment class action lawsuits. And part of this complaint involved, there was a discrimination charge that he brought for himself about just the way that he was fired as a disability discrimination. But in the process of that, what came to light is that in the case, the lawsuit was actually on a human trafficking, a civil violation of overtime and prevailing wage laws, as well as a human trafficking element. Because what this company ended up doing, according to the filings at least, is that they were working with, that outsourced their HR department to a third party who was in charge of all of this immigration stuff in terms of getting folks their visas and work authorizations. And in the process, they were hiring people on the visa. It said that they were bringing in skilled engineers to work a job that, you know, the company was listed as like a 80K, starting like $86,000 a year or something like that. When they were brought here, they ended up putting these workers to work as just facilities maintenance, I think. Forget what the actual title was, but it was a job that was posted on the company's website as a like a GED was all that was required to do it. So it wasn't like a high level like certification required engineering job. It was something that walking off the street with some training anybody could do, at least according to the company. And then so they were, number one, they were not getting paid what they had told the government. They needed these visas for these workers because this is such a high job classification that they need this workforce to be of this caliber, and that's why they need to import workers, and they're required to be paying them the wage that they certified on those applications. Not only were they not paying that, they were also not paying people overtime. They were charging folks like a fee, I think, or a deposit of a $10,000 that they were binding people to this employer so that they wouldn't, if they canceled their contract or if they decided to leave before the year or 2 years or however long it was up, they were going to be obligated to reimburse the company to the tune of $10,000 or something of the sort, for reimbursements for the travel and application fees, which you can't do that. You can't charge your workers for that under the work visa programs. And then on top of everything else, they were paying people. It's tragic, really, but it's just so ridiculous. They were paying people. They were required to pay a prevailing wage, but they were paying people the prevailing wage according to where they were coming from in Mexico, instead of the prevailing wage, which is, you know, what people usually make in that industry in the area where they're working in the US, coming out to some less than $1,500 or less than $500 a month, because they were converting it from pesos. So all of these, I mean, this is why there was not only a wage lawsuit, but they charged trafficking in this civil complaint. And there was $1 million settlement, I think, that was agreed to, somewhere around $1 million. And some of the unclaimed funds, after the window had closed for people to come forward and claim those funds, were still sitting there. And because the company was based out of Ohio, and some folks were close to the law firm, knew about the local worker center, they suggested that any of the unclaimed funds could go as a gift as a next friend, the Cypre gift, to this organization that helps workers in similar situations like this to come forward.
If there are any questions, you chat.
Yeah, I've been looking at the chat. People are welcome to put anything over the Zoom who are listening in, but I have not been seeing any so far. I hope that doesn't mean that people on Zoom are bored. Yeah.
Once again, you've done.
Just as like a closing or parting thought, I do want to say, like at the end of the day, there are many abuses and many needs in the community, and it's very easy to kind of wring your hands or feel bad or feel helpless in the situation. And for no one more than for a lot of the workers who are going through this. But at the end of the day, these workers are some of the most powerful and savvy and just incredible people who take up the mantle and strike that blow and come forward, not just for themselves, but they really are doing a service to the whole community. And I just want to lift up how powerful and incredible like they are, and how we really would not be here if it weren't for workers who trust us and who trust the whole community when they come forward and speak their truth to power and hold these companies accountable and fight for their community and for their rights as a whole community. So just want to lift up how incredible they are.
Comment, they're definitely not bored. Thank you.
We're sharing all of this.
Okay.
Thanks, Dylan.